My job is to get inside this guy's head and to create some sort of a dialogue that maybe allows us to understand what goes on in that head so that we can prevent other people from becoming victims. And that's the goal of it. So it is, you never move past it. And I'm not equating with interviewing a predator with, surviving a relative or a loved one's murder. It's a different thing.
Sure.
But you just learn how to live with it.
Yeah, you do.
Testimony continued today in the most notorious criminal trial in Richland County history. Dr. John Boyle is accused of killing his wife Noreen and burying her body in the basement of his new home in Erie, Pennsylvania.
The 12-year-old son finally took the stand.
As I heard a scream, I heard a thud. It was about this loud.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty.
When I was 12 years old, my testimony sent my father to prison for murdering my mother. This podcast serves as a type of therapy and reconciliation for myself, and it is my hope that it helps anyone who has experienced deception, betrayal, and dark trauma. I'm Collier Landry, and this is Moving Past Murder. Hey movers, what's going on? Welcome back to another episode of Moving Past Murder. I'm your host, Collier Landry. Happy Friday, everybody. Oh, I'm in a good mood because you know why? I have an extra special guest for you guys today. Somebody who I have admired for years and I've wanted to sit down, I've wanted to take a seat with, but not on that level. But you know what I mean. I've wanted to sit down and pick this man's brain for such a long time. I am so excited to have him on the program. But first, I want to thank all of you for every week tuning into my new episodes, whether that's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Audible, wherever you get your podcasts from, or watching me on YouTube where you can click like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate your support. And an extra special thank you to those of you who are supporting me on my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/Collier Landry. Your contributions help support this program and help me bring amazing interviews like I am today with exclusive people in the true crime world and people that I think really have a great, amazing story to tell. I'm so humbled by your support and all the DMs that I get from you guys reaching out and really thanking me for the content and asking questions and engaging with me on my IG lives, which are every Tuesday, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern time. I'm just stoked to have your feedback because at the end of the day, I want to provide content that you guys feel is engaging to you. I have a special DM that I want to read today from Laura Fenner. She is on Instagram and she reaches out and says, Collier, just watched a murder in Mansfield. So incredibly moved by your story. You are such an emotionally intelligent, well-thought, warm, kind person. Even when your dad is verbally abusing you in his letters, after all the trauma you suffered, you still managed to remain calm, measured, and articulate. I just wanted to reach through the screen and give you a big hug. Your whole demeanor and earnestness is endearing. I hope you are very proud of the person you are, accepting that you're not going to get what you crave from somebody who is insanely difficult, but also a huge release. You can't go to a DIY store and expect to get a loaf of bread from there, just like you can't go to a psychopath and sociopath and expect truth, compassion, and empathy. I wish you all the happiness and success in the future. Thank you, Laura Fenner, for reaching out. That is really wonderful to hear. I'm so glad when you guys see, my film, A Murder in Mansfield, or you hear the podcast and it moves you and you guys want to give me a big hug. I appreciate that. But no, in all seriousness, your support, just sending me messages makes me feel like I'm doing the right thing and I'm contributing that little bit to society that I've always wanted to do and really spreading the message and helping you guys move through your own personal trauma by sharing my personal experiences, whether it be through my father's letters from prison or through my film, or just my kind of general observations of someone who's a survivor in this true crime world that didn't really ask for it, So anyways, today's episode features a 10-time Emmy Award-winning journalist and television personality. He is most famous for his show To Catch a Predator, which has been on for, 18 years now running. And he has a new podcast called Predators I've Caught. So I'm so pleased to welcome this man to my program, and I'm ready to take a seat with him. Please welcome Chris Hansen. So you had To Catch a Predator, which is how I know and love you and your work on that. You were just saying 18 years on, it's the same story. How do you sort of reconcile with that as far as seeing the same thing over and over again?
Well, Collier, imagine this. I mean, when we first started doing the predator investigations, we merely had decoys from an online watchdog group called Perverted Justice in chat rooms on AOL and Yahoo. That was it. I mean, that was our only means of putting somebody out there to see if, in fact, an adult would hit upon them, a predator, and try to create a liaison for sex. Well, today, 18 years after that very first investigation, the amount of social media platforms upon which a potential predator can approach a child has exploded. I mean, I can't even keep up with them. It's not just, Tinder and Snapchat and, all these different hookup type applications, but there's so many others, and it's the interactive games. And we had a case just a few weeks ago where a 12-year-old was approached on Instagram, and the predator set up a date and met her, sexually assaulted her, and it turns out this is just one of at least 3 victims that we know. And this is Instagram, where you think your kids are safe. And during the pandemic, more kids have been online more than ever before, and the number of reports of inappropriate approaches between adults and children has skyrocketed, according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which all these social media platforms, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, they all have to mandatory reporting. They all have to mandatorily report these things to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So, it's out there. The technology has changed, and it's difficult for the investigators and for our teams to keep up with it.
Because you started in radio, if I'm correct. Is that right?
Long time ago, yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously you came to the show as a journalist with that sort of background. I said, it's like one of the things that I think about with you is, when you're a war journalist, or you're a photographer like a David Burnett, and you're like, who's very, very famous for Vietnam War photography. And that you go into these situations and what's going to happen, but it doesn't make it any less traumatic or any less more impactful on you. And I guess, this show is called Moving Past Murder. So I'm curious how that affects you and how you move past sort of the same thing.
Well, you don't really ever move past it. I mean, before I jumped on with you, I was doing, my podcast, Predators I've Caught, with Chris Hansen. And in that show, we go back over cases that we've already done.
Yeah.
There are 400 or 500 of them. And so because during the investigation, we have background on the guy and we have some information, and, I'm in the moment, but I don't have the chance to really immerse myself in it because it happens so quickly. We're taking people inside the commission of a felony, basically. And so you have to react and you have to be at your best. But the podcast and going back over these things and just immersing myself in the transcripts, in the interviews, in the police interviews after I do the interview with the predator, it brings you right back into that moment. And it's a very strange experience because you don't feel the trauma of it as you're doing it, you're just doing it. But when you go back over and relive it, it takes it to a different level. And it's just as intense, if not more so, going back through the material years after the fact than it was when you were actually doing it. At the time, you're looking at the guy's hands. Are they in his pocket? Is there a threat? Even though I'm surrounded by security and there's law enforcement there, you're on your tippy toes,
Sure.
Paying attention and trying to figure out, okay, if I ask this, what does that say? What does he say? And anybody can jump out of a back room and scare the hell out of somebody and create 10 seconds of dramatic television. My job is to get inside this guy's head and to create some sort of a dialogue that maybe allows us to understand what goes on in that head so that we can prevent other people from becoming victims. And that's the goal of it. So it is, you never move past it. And I'm not equating with interviewing a predator with, surviving a relative or a loved one's murder. It's a different thing.
Sure.
But you just learn how to live with it.
Yeah, you do. You do. I first saw the show on YouTube in like reruns that people would record and play, and you guys were in Petaluma mostly at that time. And it was like tech guys, and they were mostly from like Bangladesh or India. It felt like, I mean, there were some white individuals, but it felt like there was, in the area, there was a lot of tech people that were coming over. And I just remember watching it. And then I remember seeing the repeaters, the people that you've, you know, you're very famous for having the line, "Yeah, take a seat." Have a seat,
right,
you know,
exactly.
and it's just like, how many times do people want to hear that? And I think that when you don't understand it, when people are just like, oh, what creeps, oh, these savages, or whatever you want to say about them, and yes, they are, but also there has to be a very severe degree of mental illness. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I think in some cases it's that. I think they break down into, you know, in my experience, and I'm not a therapist, but
Sure.
you know, in dealing with hundreds of these guys over the years, in my experience, they break down into three different categories. There's the hardcore heavy hitter, you know, the true pedophile predator who would be doing this with or without the internet. You know, the guy who'd be at the movie theater, the bad Little League coach, the bad Cub Scout master, you know, something along those lines. Those guys, they can't be fixed. They're going to do this no matter what. And whether they're wired that way or whether it's the result of, you know, some traumatic childhood experience, whatever it is, they're not going to get over it. And then you've got this younger group of guys who are late teens, early 20s. It's illegal what they're doing. It's wrong. It could damage a child for life. But they look at it as a Romeo-Juliet situation. If it works out, in a couple of years, it won't be illegal. And those are the guys who can be intercepted, I think, in some cases, and reformed, helped out, and can be monitored and counseled and get some therapy and never offend again. And then you've got this interesting group in the middle, these guys who are predisposed to having a sexual attraction relationship with a underage boy or girl, but they wouldn't do anything about it. They wouldn't act on it without the internet, the addictive nature, the 24/7 access, and the anonymity. They start saying things online that they wouldn't say face to face. And suddenly, through the course of this conversation and this urge that they either choose not to control or don't control or can't control, they cross that line between fantasy and reality, and they're knocking on our door, and they show up. And we see a lot of that. And to me, that's the most vexing and the most interesting category here, because, you know, can you fix somebody like that? Do you have to lock them up? Is there a combination of treatment and punishment that works? And I don't have that answer, and I don't know that anybody does.
It's interesting you brought up earlier the video games and all of that, because there's some things you just never you think it's, you know, and especially you think back to the pandemic. I mean, and I believe you were saying this on Flagrant too, and I'm sure you've said it ad nauseum over the last 2 years, but the pandemic seemed to really enhance these predatory situations, because people are locked up.
There's more opportunity, you know, there's more opportunity. People are locked up. People have more time to do both good and bad things. And, you know, when you talk about statistics, you know, you've got to trust what the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children does and says in the records it keeps, because that's really kind of the gold standard. And because there is mandatory reporting on the part of all these social media platforms, it's a pretty accurate reflection of what's going on. That doesn't mean it's information that can lead to catching somebody. It can, but it gives you a kind of an aggregate view of what's happening. And the numbers during the pandemic were staggering, you know, and I don't see the problem going away anytime soon. And as we continue to develop these, you know, interactive apps and social media platforms, and if we go end-to-end encryption, that's going to be even more difficult to track some of this. So it really comes down to, you know, the conversation you start at home with your children, or your nieces or your nephews. You know, you got to start at an age-appropriate level and say, look, there are people out there who want to trick you, grown-ups. Kids don't like to be tricked. And then as they get older and as their experience online expands, you have to, you know, have a more explicit and detailed conversation about the safety. Because, look, if you talk about the drug problem, Collier, you know, we can talk about demand reduction, treatment, whether we treat it as a felony or whether we treat it as a disease. And you can have a similar conversation with online predatory behavior, but there isn't the body of treatment available.
Well, it's almost the same thing.
Treatment.
You're dealing with an addiction.
Well, it is, except there are addiction specialists all up and down Park Avenue here in New York. There are people who go into medicine to practice all kinds of different areas. But the practice of studying predators and sexual predatory behavior, it's not a popular place. I mean, you've got some very dedicated psychiatrists who go into federal prisons and deal with these guys. And their base of work is very important and very telling. But, there's not enough of it. And it's easy to understand why. But that's one of the issues here. And that's, we don't have a good handle on how to fix it. And we want easy answers in our society. We want,
of course,
the punishment that works. We want the treatment that works, and it's not that easy. And so, fortunately, there are some very dedicated, bright people working in this field, and I plan on having some of them on the podcast in the episodes to come to kind of talk about this, to keep this dialogue going, because I think at the end of the day, what these investigations have done, whether it's the predator investigations or any of the other things that we've done, they create a dialogue and awareness that didn't exist before. And I think as, journalists and filmmakers, in your case, it's, that's our job. That's what we do.
The whole reason I'm even in Hollywood, I went to school for music at Ohio University, and then I went to Oberlin, and I dropped out because I didn't want to be a music teacher, and I wanted to be a performer, and I came out to LA, but I really wanted to come out to tell my story, and that's how I ended up getting into filmmaking. But, so that sort of passion really drove me to do that. How did you get in? How specifically did you get into Catch a Predator? You're a journalist. I mean, what was your journalistic background leading into that? I mean, did you have, I have that personal experience of me just like, I was very obsessed with, like,
it becomes your passion.
Yeah. And I always felt like, when I pitched the documentary, it was originally going to be a television series. And I said, look, I'm fascinated in the fact that bad guy goes to jail, victim is dead, state gets this restitution, gavel hits, we go next, we never examine the consequences of violence and the repercussions and ramifications, because at that time, nobody was. Now it's very cool and very hip to be woke, or whatever you want to call it, to be very into this. Oh, what happens? What are the implications? Now we're talking about these things. That wasn't in fashion 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and I think it's just what you said, we want a quick answer. We want a quick fix, oh, they're a drug addict, move on. Or, oh, they're a sex addict, move on. It's a lot. It goes a lot deeper than that. But that drove me. So where did you come into this? Like specifically, was there something that happened?
I had been, I had been, doing investigative and crime reporting for years. I've been doing this for 40 years. So I had been at Dateline and doing a lot of different stories. I mean, the predator work is 10% of my portfolio, but it just happens to be what has become iconic and so interesting and a part of pop culture like nothing else I've ever done. I always say, I've won 10 Emmys. None of them are for Predator. They're all for other investigative reporting. But no other body of work has been parodied on South Park and, other places. And so so you take that and you use it for all the good it has and embrace it.
You've arrived essentially South Park.
Yeah, I know. Well, I always tell the story, my two older boys went to high school in Connecticut, and, having a dad on TV was no big deal because, they went to school with kids whose dads were captains of industry and sports figures and everything else. But when South Park did a Chris Hansen Predator parody, suddenly I was the coolest dad, But, it was never meant to be its own series. It was I pitched it after I became aware of the online watchdog group Perverted Justice as, just a segment on Dateline. And when I saw the work that Perverted Justice was doing, I figured if we could use their decoys, their ability to be decoys, posing as children in chat rooms, and our ability to wire a house with hidden cameras and microphones, the result could be pretty compelling. So I pitched it, and the management bought into it, and smart people weighed in to make it better. And so we did it in Long Island in 18 years ago. And I was driving out there, and I was thinking, what if nobody shows up? What if I've just wasted tens of thousands of dollars of the network's money? And with that, my producer called and said, where the hell are you? We've got two guys, scheduled to show up in 45 minutes. And in the next 2.5 days, we had 17 guys surface in that investigation, including a New York City firefighter. And I thought, wow. And it went by so fast, but I was just stunned. And we talked about how the story should go and what it was going to look like. And we had all the stuff. I mean, it was very compelling. It's like nothing we've ever seen or done before. And I had done a lot of hidden camera work over the years, but nothing where we took the viewer inside the commission of a felony, where there was a confrontation. And remember, in those first couple investigations, we didn't collaborate with law enforcement. It was just us. And law enforcement would sometimes go in and be able to make a case after the fact. But it wasn't until the third investigation that we actually collaborated with law enforcement, because it was the socially responsible thing to do. And from a television production standpoint, it was unfulfilling, to see these guys leave and just be, twirling their umbrella in the wind as they left a home after trying to rape a child, essentially. So, we moved on, and, we've adapted it over the years, and it's become what it is. And again, we're on our third version of it, basically, that we're shooting right now.
I mean, it's amazing and it's disheartening at the same time.
Yeah.
Because it just keeps happening. And I even think, you said, okay, so 18 years ago, it's what, 2004? And I don't even, I barely remember really using the internet at that time. I Google, Yahoo, that type of thing. But obviously chat rooms is where a lot of this started, bulletin board systems and things, I suppose. It's just... Yeah,
it was chat rooms on AOL and Yahoo. And then, over the years now it's, everything from Tinder, Grindr to, Snapchat to TikTok to, any other social media platform where people meet each other and converse. Instagram, the video games, interactive video games, a lot of it goes on there. And now there's Discord and a lot of areas where it's difficult to monitor. And so it's so ubiquitous that it's hard even to, we have the figures, as I mentioned, from the NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, but it's so ubiquitous that it's really hard to get a number on it. People always ask, how many predators are out there on the internet at any given time. We don't know is the honest answer. You can try to extrapolate it, and we've tried to do that, and there's a lot. That's the answer. And the danger is real. So you have to create this awareness, and you have to create this discussion, this dialogue at home, and that's the best way, I think, in my experience, to protect kids, which is, if you don't know somebody in real life, then you don't know them online. And, when I was growing up, parents told their kids, don't talk to strangers. Good advice then, good advice today. But the problem is some of these predators, and I read the transcripts all the time, they're so adept at grooming that the guy who's a stranger on Wednesday is no longer a stranger on Friday or Saturday.
It's, my father, he's obviously in prison for murdering my mother, which I witnessed, and he's still incarcerated to this day because of my testimony and me not letting him get away with it. Well, one of the things that I never knew, and see, when all this went down, I was abandoned by both sides of my family, and I went into the foster care system, and I don't know why my phone rang. It's turned off. I went into the foster care system, and I didn't have anybody to my mother's side of the family didn't want anything to do with me. My father's side of the family didn't want to do anything with me because, you put your father in prison, or you're going to put your father in prison, blah, blah, blah. What I didn't know is that my mother's side of the family hated me so much because of how I looked, because they felt that because I was male and tall, that I looked like my father, even though I looked like my mother. But my father had molested my two cousins a year and a half before he murdered my mother. They're both girls. He was a doctor. He molested them under the guise of physicals, and he was going to be arrested for that. And the girls were so broken up over it that they couldn't bring themselves to really testify at a trial, and they couldn't arrest him for it. And one of the things that the investigator that I was working with had said, the Baltimore Police Department said, look, there's no way this guy didn't kill his wife, and get him for us because he's a piece of shit. And it's when you, so there he is as a predator in that sense, and then it obviously goes to the extreme, which is murdering my mother. Do you feel like when you see these people? I mean, it's interesting you said the Romeo and Juliet syndrome. And look, man, I'm from Ohio. You're from Michigan, but I'm closer to Kentucky. We all know these stories of these people who get married to underage girls or guys, and it does happen. But this Romeo and Juliet sort of thing, that's a whole other way of looking at it. Like they almost feel like they're the saviors, or they got this God complex. I think even with my father, obviously it's a control thing, and coercive control. And then you have with these people, they think they're saving, they romanticize it, and it just becomes so difficult to see.
It's the justification of it. It's how they justify it in their mind to go there in the first place, and then the justification they try to use when I confront them. And we still get guys up until this, and including this latest investigation just weeks ago, where the guy says, well, I had gone on this site because I knew troubled girls were there, and I just came over to help her, to put her on a straight and narrow path, and to be with her until her parents got home. And it's like, do you think that's the first time I've ever heard that excuse? Right. It's not. It's, for 18 years now I've heard it. And you see it in the text, in the transcripts of the chats. It's the same grooming, the same talk. It's like they go to a website to get help on how to do this, how to Predator 101.
It's a For Dummies book.
It's
at Barnes & Noble.
Yeah, exactly. Predator for Dummies.
There was, so I remember that the show originally was it canceled, or did you guys kind of shut down for a while because there was a district attorney? Is that correct? In New York, there was
an assistant district attorney who committed suicide after the police went to go try to arrest him, but that didn't have anything to do with the show. We went on and did multiple episodes afterwards, but in fact, the next episode of my podcast deals with that particular case.
Oh, wow.
Conrad. And what had happened was, not only did they find child porn on his computer, and he knew that was coming, and he was going to have to face the music for that, he was going to face the charges of the online solicitation. He never showed up in this sting operation, but the crime takes place online. Then he had the child porn, and then it turns out, which is something we reveal in the next episode of my podcast, that on that computer was also evidence and information that led to criminal charges against Conrad's boss, the actual DA, for embezzlement and financial wrongdoing. And this is the guy who came out strong against the Murphy, Texas Police Department for, arresting him at his house. And that was a courtesy, actually, because, they could have made a big scene at his office Monday morning, but they decided to take him, what they thought was in a quiet, responsible way at his home. But we went on to do multiple investigations after that. I think partly what happened at NBC was the investigations became very expensive. I think the network was ready to have me do some other work at the time. And I think they also found that they could expand the material we had, the library of Predator material, into different versions and run them on MSNBC, and people would continue to watch, and we'd update them and follow the cases through the court system. And it was very popular for many years. And then a few years back, we did another version called Hansen versus Predator, which aired on Crime Watch Daily, a syndicated show I did. And now we've got Takedown with Chris Hansen, which is the new Predator episodes that we have coming out. We're going to put out one episode on the YouTube channel, Have a Seat with Chris Hansen, in the next week or so, but it's going to go exclusively on our new crime streaming platform called True Blue, which is going to launch in November. So they'll all be there.
It's wild. You said, you've got 10 Emmys and the work that you've done, is probably, even though this seems to have a very broad impact, but has the work that you won the Emmys for, was that for also true crime based? material?
Yeah, it was investigative crime, breaking news, crime, investigative stuff. I'll give you an example. We went to Cambodia and infiltrated brothels, essentially selling children as young as 5 and 6 years old to Westerners for sex. And we collaborated with an NGO called International Justice Mission, and we posed as sex tourists and went into these brothels and captured very compelling hidden camera video. And we then were part of a raid where 37 girls were rescued. We did the whole story, and we confronted Americans who had gone over there for sex tourism. And then we followed up a few years later with some of the rescued girls and their lives. And so it became this very compelling narrative of what goes on over there, who takes part in it. And we were, once again, able to take people to a place they wouldn't normally get to see and hear things they wouldn't normally get to hear. And, that becomes very compelling information. And it led to, the U.S. government taking a different, more aggressive stance towards sex tourism. Colin Powell was interviewed for the piece, and it was a topic near and dear to his heart. So we had the attention of the U.S. government, and the Canadian government saw it, and based upon the video that we had of the brothels, they were able to match up video found in the trunk of a guy who beat up a sex worker in Vancouver, and they linked him to going over to the same brothel, and then were able to charge him on a 7-year felony with, sex tourism, essentially. So it was like this one story, this 1 hour of television kept making significant change worldwide. And
it's amazing,
that's
though,
the
right?
sort of thing that's, it's expensive, it's dangerous, and it's time consuming to do. So it's not something you can do every week. But when you get the opportunity, to affect change like that, and to take people into that world as dark as it may be, I think it's important to do. And I've been very fortunate over the years, and continue to be today, to, have supporters who allow me to do that work.
That's incredible. I mean, as somebody who does this, who got into that to affect change, to change the conversation, to speak out, I really admire you, man.
Well, I appreciate that. I admire your work too. I mean, that's hard to do. It's hard to dig into the murder of your mother committed by your father, and pour all that out in a documentary. I mean, it's not easy to do. But look, if it was easy, everybody could do it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of work we do that's very interesting to viewers and listeners, and we do that work, and it allows us to do the big picture tentpole events that we do. And when you get the opportunity to do that, and it's something I did even in local news. I'd cover whatever story happened that day, and I'd find a passion project, and I'd chip away, and you get 4 of those a year, and suddenly you're making a difference in people's lives. And again, you take people to a place they wouldn't normally get to go.
And it's the impact. It's the
Yeah.
It's
knowing what's going to get. It's also, you get a sense over the year. I've been doing this 40 years.
Sure.
I first got interested in journalism when I was 15, when Jimmy Hoffa was kidnapped 1.5 miles from my childhood home. And, I kind of got bit by the bug then, and went off to school and studied at college, and was fortunate enough to get right into radio and ultimately television before I even graduated from Michigan State. And so I had a good jump on it. And, was allowed the flexibility, the latitude to, crop sources, and to take a day here and there, and to, immerse myself in different topics. And if you bring home the bacon, 8 times out of 10, they tend to give you a little longer leash, and you use that for good.
Sure. Yeah, and then you can sort of do what you want, and you can really do the things
the goal,
that matter
really.
most.
I mean, to explore whatever topics you want to explore.
Now, you said you had 2 boys. You have 3 kids, or?
I have 2 sons, and then I have a stepdaughter and a stepson. So
the kids
the
are in
2
the
youngest
business,
are
right?
in college. My older 2 are in the business. So my oldest lives in Brooklyn, and he's production associate and assistant cameraman, and grip, and he works on films and commercials and crime shows. He's worked with me on some stuff. He shot a Predator show with me, but he's got his own gig going on. And, these guys are very involved in a lot of different things, and they have these, networks of guys and gals who work in television, film, and they stay very busy. And he's doing a great job. And then my second son is a television reporter for the Fox station in Orlando, and it's his third market. He's moving his way up and doing very well, and it's fun to see. We have a morning call every once in a while where we criticize each other's hard work and see if we can't help each other out once in a while.
Well, I'm a 600 DP, so I appreciate all my camera guys for sure. And I did live in Orlando for a year.
Sure. A lot of news in Florida. Orlando's become a big town now. It's there's something going every day. Mm-hmm. And it's
not always good either.
No, but it's, I remember years ago, I was a reporter in Tampa, where I went after I was in Lansing. And, any market in Florida, I mean, you're going to get Florida stuff, and it's it keeps a reporter busy,
There's a lot going on down there. There's a lot going on in Ohio too, sadly.
Mm-hmm. Well, everywhere. There's always,
And you're a Spartan.
Yep.
And
class of 81.
Nice. But, unfortunately there's that dark cloud that hangs over with Larry Nasser.
Oh, Nasser, yeah. Well, that's a horrible situation, and it highlights, the responsibility of, the university, of journalists, of, anybody who's supposed to be keeping an eye out and protecting, our students and our athletes. There was that horrible incident at Michigan State, and my heart goes out to those young women, those survivors who were first traumatized and then traumatized again because law enforcement didn't immediately pick up on it. And it took a while before those cases were taken seriously the way they should have been. And finally, he was brought to justice. There's another case at Michigan. They had a physician. There was one recently at UCLA. I mean, it's out there. And, too many times historically, universities have been dismissive. Penn State, for instance, with Sandusky for too long. And people who were involved in athletics got a pass. And in the Michigan State case, horrifyingly, this guy was so arrogant, such a narcissist, and such a predator that he, thought he could get away with it, and even did get away with it, because he scared these young girls into silence. Some of this stuff happened with parents on the other side of a screen. I mean, imagine the shock and horror and the guilt and the horrible, aftermath of that. And all because, and it's not the parents' fault, it's not the girl's fault, it's Nasser's fault, first and foremost, for being an evil human being. And then, the university's got to keep an eye out. And I'm a big Michigan State booster. I know some of the people who lost their jobs over that deal. And you can justify it any way you want and say, well, so-and-so was paying more attention to basketball and football than gymnastics. But that's your job at the end of the day, And if you're not keeping an eye on it, you better damn well have somebody who is. And so, heads roll because of that. There's a lot of liability there.
So what I'm curious of is, so you mentioned this, and then you say the parents on the other side of the screens, and this is, it's like when you watch something like the Michael Jackson documentary, right? Mm-hmm. And you see, and like, for example, Jeffrey Epstein, right? And you see the sort of the allure of whatever's happening, whether it be athletics, whether it be stardom, whether it be money. Fame, exactly. Do you feel that almost there's a willing participation sometimes where people sort of turn a blind eye to it when they should be maybe protecting their children? Or
well, absolutely. I think it's in some sense a corruption. It's people are swayed by fame and fortune, and in some cases that's allowed lapses in judgment that have put kids in precarious and dangerous situations. And I think that's a big part of it. and you have to be watchful as a parent, whether it's online or whether it's, who your kids are hanging out with. And I think fame corrupts and power corrupts. And, if you let yourself get caught up in that, I mean, we see it now. And one of the things that we're getting ready to report on are all these parents who are promoting their children on YouTube and TikTok, and they're being taken advantage of by people online, and some of these kids are being essentially pimped out by their own parents because they're making money, on YouTube. And we saw all too well, not this is an example of parents not doing the right thing, but there was a case in Naples, Florida, where a girl had a reasonably done TikTok presence, and there was a stalker, and the guy showed up at the door with a shotgun, blasted the door open because he was obsessed with this teen girl. And had the dad not been an ex-cop who had a gun and shot him, I mean, he could have killed the whole family. And but it highlights what the potential dangers out there, and you have to be careful who your kids are exposed to. And there are other examples. You see some of these Sharons or these people who are promoting their children on social media sites and exploiting their children on social media sites, or adopting multiple children so they can have a presence on YouTube. And it's shocking what people will do to make money with their parents. And that's a shocking part of it.
It's money is the root of all evil, as they say.
Yeah, in some cases, that's true.
It's I mean, it feels almost like, you dive down the rabbit hole so far with these things, and then how, it's just like a cop. I remember the movie Heat with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro and everybody. Great movie, my Michael Mann. But there's a moment when he's talking about, he's in the argument with his girlfriend or third ex-wife or third wife or whatever. And he says something like, I just had, he just basically talks about the stress of the job, literally, like, I don't bring that shit home. Like, I don't, I saw a crackhead cook her baby in the microwave because it was crying, or something like that. These guys, and you yourself, when you talk about these things and seeing this horror every day, how do you find that work-life balance? How do you not bring that home to your family? How do you not look at your kids?
Well, I think over the years, yeah. I mean, you have to, compartmentalize sometimes and say, okay, this is my work state of mind, and you have to transition into, dad and husband, and, it's easier now because the kids are adults, but you have to be able to, in my case, have your athletic releases and to have your intellectual releases and to be able to, get away from it. I've, always been pretty good. I'm sure there's been an impact on me that I don't even realize, but generally speaking, I've always been able to transition into, home life and ski down a mountain, or, go for a run, or go to the gym, or watch a movie, or, do whatever, I'm into at that moment to, get away from it. And you just have to, because if you live in that dark world the whole time, you get too dark yourself, and you can't do that. And also, I mean, for me at least, I think it's been the ability to have sort of a dark sense of humor, a gallows sense of humor, and to even in the in the Predator investigations, I mean, there are undeniably humorous moments, right? And you have to just
100%
accept that, and you do have a dark sense of humor, and that's not appropriate with everybody in your circle, but it is a great.
I'm the most sardonic person I know. That's for sure.
Exactly.
So, I mean, was there? What was like the one case? And it doesn't have to be Predator, of course. Was there one case that you just were like, "Fuck, man, I wish that didn't happen"? And again, not a Predator.
Well, I think you're a witness to the truth. Career. I mean, look, 9/11, I wish didn't happen.
Yeah.
You know, Oklahoma City bombing, I wish didn't happen. All that stuff I wish didn't happen, but it did. And it's like, you know, what I always say is the reporter's prayer. God don't let it happen, but if it does, let me be the first guy there to report on it. And so, you know, you go through it. Those things are just as impactful on a reporter as you know, the Predator series or anything else. I mean, you're watching, in the case of 9/11 or the case of Oklahoma City, you know, large-scale death. I mean, even just yesterday morning here in New York City, we had the guy who got on the train with the smoke canisters. And
they find him?
Shot up him? Not yet. Not as of when I got on with you. I'm going to look right now. But, I mean, they know who it is. They've got his YouTube presence. You know, it's obviously somebody who's suffering from mental illness and has an axe to grind with the subway system and the mayor of New York. And he's got some criminal history and a large-scale footprint on YouTube, ranting and raving. And I've looked at some of the videos against the mayor, against his crackdown on subway crime and homeless people. And, you know, he feels aggrieved by some sort of treatment he received in the New York area years ago. And clearly he had plotted this. I mean, just because somebody is mentally ill or crazy doesn't make them stupid. I mean, the guy is a pretty bright guy who's able to pull this off, you know. And so they're looking for him. I have no doubt they'll find him. I mean, NYPD is the finest law enforcement agency in the world and, you know, certainly among the biggest. And they have cooperative efforts with every other law enforcement agency in the world. And they'll find him.
Yeah.
I don't think he's gotten that far. They found his vehicle. They found the gun, the credit card, keys to the rental vehicle. So it's really just a matter of time before they find him.
I want to continue on this, but I do want to ask something. You know, there was, you know, you mentioned him on YouTube. Wasn't there a big YouTuber that was just exposed or was taken down that was doing a lot of this predatory activity as well?
Well, there have been several of them. I mean,
or
dozens and dozens. But the one that we focused on that turned into a documentary on Discovery Plus was a guy who went by the name Onision, Gregory James
that's
Jackson.
right. You guys did that.
And
right.
he was very popular YouTuber, and then, you know, got involved in grooming and bullying and abusing and inappropriately interacting with fans and inviting some of them out to his home in Washington State. And there were allegations of sexual impropriety and just really awful and illegal behavior. And so we started to investigate him and interview some of his victims, and it turned into a big YouTube series on our YouTube channel, Have a Seat with Chris Hansen, and then it turned into a series on Discovery Plus. So it's called Onision in Real Life, and we lay him bare for what he is, and ultimately
That's
YouTube
great.
demonetized him and cracked down on him because he was just the stuff he was doing to young women was horrifying. But yeah, that's out now. And he's not alone. I mean, there's a lot of this. I mean, YouTube has been, in some ways, the great, democratization of, people having access, citizen reporters and creative people, and it's great for a lot of people. But it's also created an opportunity for abuse and predatory behavior, and it's hard to monitor.
I mean, how does this not give you anxiety as a parent and your parenting choices, right?
Well, I mean, my guys are past it. I'm lucky.
Yeah.
My guys aren't 3 and 4 years old. My guys are 30 to 20. So,
but what would you say to the parents that are dealing with this?
Well, as I mentioned, I think you have to sit down and have a discussion. You have to, first of all, you have to lead by example. If mom or dad's on the computer doing nefarious things, it's not going to create a very good example for the children. But you also just have to be very honest and age appropriate in your discussion about the potential dangers out there and what they are and why you have to be careful. And I hear all the time, we're on the 3rd generation of predator investigation followers, and it's very rewarding to me to be walking down a street in any city in America and have somebody come up and say, "Hey, I watched your shows and it helped me not to be the victim of a predator online. And I saw the new one, by the way. And thanks for doing it." I mean, that's why we do it, is to create that awareness and that dialogue.
You ever get anybody that's seen the show that is
Oh, yeah.
come up to you and said, I reformed my ways because I was going down a dark path?
Not so much that. We have people who surface in the
That'd be a
investigations
lot to
who have
admit,
seen
for
the shows.
sure.
Yeah. I mean, here's what I do get a lot: is somebody who'll say, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" And somebody who you wouldn't, how would you know? But somebody who will say, "Look, I had a unfortunate experience with an adult as a child, and your series helped me to cope with that, and it helped me to know that while my predator was not brought to justice, or maybe he was, but to see somebody out there doing something about it has been cathartic to me, and that's very rewarding as well."
Yeah, I mean, I get, it's funny when I made the film, and people reach out to me, and some would have circumstances that weren't quite as gruesome as mine were, but they were bad. And I always tell people, I'm like the extreme. Like I'm like the Tom Brady of the extreme trauma, like crazy family stuff. But that doesn't mean that there aren't stories and there aren't ways that these things impact people.
Oh yeah,
that are just as traumatizing. I'm like, my trauma is not bigger than yours. Mine is just such an extreme and crazy example. And my sort of way of dealing with it was doing the work that I'm doing, the film, the podcast, speaking, the TED Talk, the this, the that, being on Dr. Phil, sharing my story with people, right? But I mean, the overwhelming majority. And when I set out to make a Murder Mansfield, I was like, I want to change I want to put this to bed for myself, and I want to change one person's life, because there's a kid like me sitting in foster care. Nobody's got his back. He's lost everything. He's in the nadir of his life, and he's literally, got to do the most difficult thing, which is testifying against your parent, who has a legal team, and who murdered your mother, but who would also get off and will probably either stick you in the ground a few months later, or will make the rest of your life a living hell, and finding the courage to do that. And I wanted to speak to like those individuals, right?
Sure.
But the overwhelming majority, sadly, is people that have suffered sexual abuse. And obviously they've turned to drugs or violence or crime or whatever it is to cope with all of that. And then they see my story and they're impacted. They're really just like, oh, you really helped me. And I'm with you when as disheartening as it is to hear people going through this. It's amazing to be able to have an impact for something that you didn't even realize was going to do that. It's just like, I was just trying to do some good. I was trying to make a show. I thought this was interesting. Oh, what the hell, it's to be commended for sure. What have you been through? What is your trauma?
I've had a relatively trauma-free life. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I grew up in a very upper middle class household, and we were not wealthy, but we had, a very good life. And I always like to say, I got to go to a great high school, although I worked in the back of a bakery to pay for half of it. That was a good experience for me. I mean, I really, everybody has, little life changes along the way, but, I honestly, and maybe that's part of what drives me to do the kind of reporting I do, is because I feel very fortunate to not have had trauma. We all have loss. We lose parents, but it's, those are all explainable, understandable events in life. Life changes as well, but, it's really, I've been a very fortunate guy to have healthy kids and healthy relationships and to have a very healthy career and to be able to pursue the things that I care about. So I don't have a base of trauma to work from. I mean, it's a good question, and it's one that people often ask, because I think there's a general feeling that, well, to do this sort of work, was there something that happened to you that sparked you to be an activist journalist in this way? And there really wasn't. I mean, it just a sense of, curiosity and wanting to do something nobody else has done. And again, to take people to a place they wouldn't normally see and to, get into the head of somebody who could hurt you. And by understanding how all that works, prevent somebody else from being hurt. I mean, that's the drive here.
We look at all this stuff, right? And we have these moments where we go dark in our own lives and we go, oh, the world is just a miserable place. This is bad. And that's one of the things that I always try to be like this perpetual ball of optimism, because it's just sort of my nature.
They just arrested the subway shooter, by the way.
Oh, they did?
Yeah,
oh, wow. That's amazing. That's incredible. Well, congratulations to NYPD. And miraculously, no one was severely injured.
Oh,
or killed.
yeah. I mean, there were some severe injuries, but not life-threatening. And
yeah, life-threatening is what I mean. Yeah. Still, the trauma of all of this.
Yeah.
Is.
Well, you know what it's like being in a subway. You're trapped, and if the subway's moving, you can't get off. Brooklyn subway shooting suspect Frank James in custody. Well, that's good news.
That is good news. It's easy for people, I think, we just came out of a pandemic, and then now we're in a war, and we got a financial issue that's looming, and there's just a lot of things going on, and then there's this sort of people taking a hard look at their lives, going, is this how I really want to live my life, whether it's good or bad, right? But I always try to, when people I know have the doom and gloom, what is the positive we can take from all this? I mean, what do you say to people?
Well, I think look, tomorrow's a new day, and I always look at I mentioned Colin Powell earlier, and when I interviewed him, I
carry his rules for living in my wallet.
Well, I have it. It's in the next room here in my office. Those are the 13 rules of life, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, really, it's never as bad as it looked. It'll look better in the morning, and perpetual optimism. Perpetual optimism is a force multiplier.
Yep, force multiplier. Yeah.
So I've
man.
always been an optimistic fellow. Yeah. I got it in the next room. Yeah. It's and I think they're words to live by. I truly do. And you can get down, or you can you can be in a dark mood based upon what you have to do that day or what you do for a living. But at the end of the day, we're here for a reason, and I think we hopefully figure out what that reason is, and we do it, and that's a lot.
Yeah, life is still a beautiful thing. There's so much beauty in the world too, and we get lost in this. Obviously, you're coming from this journalism background, and you got into this. I'm always fascinated because I was thrown into this true crime world, and I'm obviously doing the podcast, but it's also about like my journey, and my journey has just been, I'll see you at CrimeCon in a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. I've always been fascinated with why people are obsessed with true crime. I mean, we're going to a trade show, a conference, whatever we want to call a symposium about true crime. Do you feel, or what? One, are you astonished by this? Because now 18 years running, it's still the same thing, wash, rinse, repeat, but people are still fascinated by it, first of all. And second of all, why do you think people are so, is it the Schadenfreude of the situation? Is it the...
Well, I think it's a little bit of everything.
Why are they obsessed with true crime?
I think everybody likes to be an armchair detective. And I think, it's very interesting to a lot of people to go see this world. This is the same reason why, movies on crime, mob movies are so popular. It's you get to see something you don't normally see in your regular life. And whether it's glamorized in a mob movie or it's it's the 50th anniversary of The Godfather, I mean, all those things are very interesting. And I think what we do as television journalists and filmmakers and documentarians is take people into that world. And I think we do all the dark stuff so they don't have to. And I think look, until we figure out how to solve every crime or how to prevent crimes from happening, it's always going to be a mystery as to the way the criminal mind works, whether it's a predator or a killer or a financial scammer, Bertie Madoff, whatever it is. You can't believe somebody would actually do that or use their, inherent intelligence for evil when they could use it for good. And so that's one of the mysteries of the world, and I don't think it'll ever be solved. And so when we delve into it to take people into that world, I think it's inherently fascinating and entertaining. And so, people are very interested in it. It's always been that way. I think we've learned how to harvest it and exploit it, hopefully in a responsible, entertaining way that creates a dialogue and a discussion and an awareness that didn't exist before. And I think that's part of why it's so fascinating. It's always been glamorized a little bit in films, Silence of the Lambs, all that. It takes people into an unbelievable world that's dark but is entertaining.
It's a good point. I never thought about that with the mob movies. I was a Goodfellas fan. I'm not gonna lie. Chris Hansen. I have so much respect for you and the work
I appreciate that
you've done over the years, and this has been probably one of the coolest things I've done since I've started the podcast. A little under a year ago. I really appreciate your time, man. This is so cool, and shout out to Stephen Cohen.
I'll see. Yeah, absolutely. Our man Stevie.
Shout out to Stephen Cohen.
We'll see you at CrimeCon.
We'll see you at CrimeCon. My guest today has been Chris Hansen. You should check out his podcast,
Predators I've Caught with Chris Hansen, and that's on all the platforms. The YouTube channel is Have a Seat with Chris Hansen. True Blue launches in the fall, so go to watchtrueblue.com, and we've got the 2 documentaries, Onision in Real Life and Unseemly, the Peter Nygard investigation, on Discovery Plus.
Fantastic, man. Thank you so much. Movers, I hope you got something out of this episode. Wow. When you think about Chris having done this for so many years, and it's just seeing the same thing over and over again, and it's, you never really kind of move past it, but you do in a lot of ways, but it still gets you. It still has those heartfelt moments. I mean, the work that he's been doing for so long is really incredible. And it's humbling. And, it's like, I remember when I first saw the program and I would see these people and I thought, mental health is such a big part of society, and taking care of yourself and people getting help and treatment. It's not to say that what they're doing is excusable by any circumstance at all. It's not at all. I mean, my father was a pedophile. But it is very, it's very interesting to look at these people with a little bit of compassion and, try to get them help, because ultimately, helping people move through this obsession that they have will ultimately make us better as a society. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm out there, and maybe, I'd love to hear what you guys think about this episode, about what you thought, about Chris, and how, he's my first really big guest on this podcast. So I'm really stoked to have him, and I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about the interview and what you thought of him. And I will be seeing Chris next week at CrimeCon Las Vegas, which is not my favorite place in the world, but it's still cool. And I'm excited to be there with a bunch of my friends and checking out this whole true crime world that I'm sort of kind of new to. I don't know. It'll be fun. CrimeCon is from April 29th to May 1st. And so hopefully I'll see some of you guys there. Anyways, I hope you really enjoyed today's episode. I know I did. And I was excited to bring you guys this content. Anyways, I'm Collier Landry, and this is Moving Past Murder. Thanks, y'all. This podcast is made possible by support from listeners just like you. Please subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible. Find us on YouTube, youtube.com/Collier Landry. The film A Murder in Mansfield is available on Investigation Discovery, Discovery Plus, and Amazon Prime Video. This podcast is a production of Don't Touch My Radio in association with RSA Entertainment. Please visit mpmpodcast.com to show your support today.